Testing. Will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chair be authorized to declare recess at any time. Without objection, so ordered. Welcome to today's Cyber Information Technologies and Innovation Subcommittee hearing entitled Science, Technology, and Innovation at the Department of Defense. Today's hearing provides an opportunity to discuss the fiscal year 2024 presidential budget request for the Department of Defense Science and Technology Policy and Programs, but more concretely to investigate how the department is and is not enabling our warfighters to operate the systems necessary for competing and winning in a 21st century conflict with a highly technical and advanced set of adversaries. I'd like to direct our witnesses and members' attention to a graphic that I hope will guide our conversation today that's being displayed. It's bigger behind you, if you can see it there, if you want to look. I don't know which is easier. Clearly, we need more TVs in this room. In 2007, amidst the Iraq War, a commercial off-the-shelf version of a system designed to protect warfighters from improvised explosive devices was fielded in low quantities to ground forces in U.S. Central Command to protect them as they transited across the region. What's displayed on the screen is a broken and I would say unjustifiably lengthy acquisitions process to design and scale a product that had proven its ability to keep our troops alive and was commercially available. From when the product demonstrated success in the field, it took the armed services 6 years to create a requirement, another 5 to trudge through the planning, programming, and budget phase of the budget cycle. It took the Defense Innovation Unit only 2 years to complete a rapid prototype based on these requirements, followed by yet another 3 years of federal acquisitions regulation contracting, rather than a streamlined production via other transaction authority. The service finally began initial fielding in late 2022 and early 2023. To put it simply, it took the Department of Defense 11 years to translate warfighter demand into a funded marketplace demand, and 5 more to deliver a product that saves American service member lives. This is just one example of likely hundreds, if not thousands. It is the norm, not the exception, too often in this world. Our job, and I think our witnesses' job, is to deliver the best leading-edge technology in America to the point of need in minimal time. And the challenges we face against the Chinese Communist Party and our efforts to defeat Russia and Ukraine only further amplify this need for speed. The United States may be home to the most vibrant and advanced innovation ecosystem in the world, but the way in which the department defaults to and normalizes processes like this case study weakens deterrence and is proven to have deadly effects on our own warfighters. We are joined today by 2 witnesses who are going to help us understand how we fix this: the Honorable Heidi Shyu, the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, and the Honorable William LaPlante, Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. They are both positioned to lead the development and procurement of critical capabilities for the Department of Defense. So as we review and discuss this coming year's budget for leading-edge technology, I would ask both of you today to help us understand what you're doing to make sure that this slide is not how the department does business in the future. What can we all do together to bring future capability into the hands of warfighters in the next 6 to 12 months, not 6 to 12 years? And I would remind members that following the open portion of today's hearing, members will reconvene in 2337 Rayburn for a classified briefing with additional representatives from DARPA and the military services. And with that, I now yield to the ranking member, the acting ranking member, Ms. Lotkin.
Thank you.
For her opening remarks.
Thanks to the chairman for convening today's hearing. I think there's a lot of bipartisan agreement on our feelings around sort of supply chain issues and getting our technology into usable form. I'm standing in today for Representative Khanna, who should be here later. Happy to be sitting next to my co-conspirator on the HASS Defense Supply Chain Task Force from last Congress, and I can think of no better partner to ensure that the department has the authorities it needs to continue to innovate and stay ahead of our adversaries. Thank you to our witnesses for coming here. I ask unanimous consent for Ranking Member Khanna's statement to be entered into the record, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
And I would just say, in similar sentiment, even though I'm just standing in, one of the most common things that I hear from people back home, from people who are not in the defense industry, is like, are we keeping up with the bad guys? They seem to be doing all this cool stuff. Are we also taking all this cool stuff and putting it into our military? into the toolkit. And it is hard to say with a straight face that we are awesome at that. And we all want the department to be awesome at that. We are all on the same page that we want to go from concept to fielding in at least the same amount of time that the Chinese government does. And at least up here, shorthand, we've always heard that it takes us from concept to fielding 3 years, where it takes the Chinese government a year. No idea if you agree with that, tell me if I'm wrong, but that is sort of shorthand what members of Congress have come to expect, and we want to tighten that crank. We want to turn that crank faster, and we stand ready to give you the authorities you need, but again, we hear over and over again that it's not authorities, that it's culture, that it's a whole bunch of other things. So looking forward to hearing how you're turning that crank. And then I would just say, research and development is important for things like weapon systems, but it's also important for other things where the Department of Defense has a key role. And I would be remiss if I did not mention the issue that I think is coming to a theater near us, to the Department of Defense in particular, which is the EPA changing its standards on PFAS and other chemicals, which will mean that the department is asked to live up to those standards in and around closed and currently in use bases. When that comes down, we're all going to turn to you and say, okay, when are you cleaning up the area around my base? They can't drink their drinking water. When are you going to do it? And honestly, I don't know that we have the technological skills yet to understand how to clean some of this up. And so I think it's important for keeping up with adversaries, but also for keeping faith back home with the responsibilities we have to the citizens of the country. So we'll just put that out there. Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, and I yield back.
Thank you. There's a great new book out. Yeah, thank you. I'm the chairman. It's a great new book out by Dan Egan, a Wisconsinite, called The Devil's Element on PFAS that I recommend. And thank you for the supply chain task force was your brainchild, and I very much enjoyed working with you on it. It was ahead of its time, and I'm proud of the work product we produced, and we're now sort of incorporating some of that into what we're doing on the Select Committee on the CCP. So thank you very much for that. With that, I recognize Ms. Hsu for 5 minutes, and thank you, Ms. Hsu. You had about 103 fever last night, and you've powered through in the interest of national security for the good of the nation to show up here today. So I award you some extra credit at the outset. We'll see how the Q&A goes, but you start off in a good position.
Thank you, Chairman Gallagher and Representative Slotkin and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the work of the Department of Defense, Research and Engineering Enterprise, and for your ongoing support. President Biden, Secretary Austin have said we're in a decisive decade for our country and our national security, one in which the department must make the right investments to ensure our continued enduring advantage over any potential adversary. The department's pacing challenge, the People's Republic of China, is a strategic competitor with the resources and the will to challenge the rules-based international order. It is important for the committee and the American people to know two things. First, we understand the challenges we face and the need to move with speed and determination. Second, the U.S. has undeniable advantage over any potential adversary. The PRC is modernizing its forces and seeks to challenge our superiority. They have not succeeded. Our task in my office and in the broader innovation enterprise is to ensure that we will maintain our enduring advantage. The National Defense Science and Technology Strategy we'll soon deliver lays out 3 lines of effort to rising to this challenge. First, we're focusing on the joint mission. Our responsibility is to provide our forces with overwhelming asymmetric technologies to deter and fight and win. Second, we are creating and fielding capabilities at speed and scale. Third, we're creating an enduring advantage by cultivating talent, strengthening infrastructure, pursuing basic research and increasing collaborations with allies and partners. We're implementing the strategy in the President's FY24 budget request, which continues historic levels of investments in research and development. It prioritizes delivery of near-term capabilities at speed and scale, directs support to joint warfighting concepts, and builds a science and technology foundation for tomorrow. Last year, we identified 14 critical technologies that underpin our advantage. The budget makes investment in each of these areas. In collaboration with Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, we have developed pathways to accelerate innovations to the field. From leap-ahead technology developed by Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, to innovation from small businesses, to the commercial companies via our defense innovation ecosystem, including the Defense Innovation Unit and the various works, to the new Office of Strategic Capital, each organization contributes to the DoD innovation pipeline. The committee knows we're investing in technologies that will extend our asymmetric advantages over any competitor. While we cannot discuss all of these efforts in this unclassified setting, I'm mentioning them to inform the American people that we are aggressively preparing for the future. Already, we're seeing benefits from the department's efforts to accelerate critical capabilities. The support of Congress has been critical to efforts such as accelerating the procurement and fielding of innovative technologies, or APFIT, which is already delivering capabilities such as advanced underwater mine detection and drop glide munitions. The budget funds the Rapid Defense Experimentation Reserve, or RADR, a series of joint experiments to demonstrate advanced capabilities for combatant commanders. RADR is just an example of our commitment to do things differently in order to accelerate the important new capabilities to the force. Last December, Secretary Austin announced the establishment of the Office of Strategic Capital, which is working with the Small Business Administration to close investment gaps in our access to critical technologies. The budget supports workforce programs such as the SMART Scholarship. With congressional support earlier this year, we announced our first university-affiliated research center at a historically Black university, Howard University, and have included significant funding FY24 requests to do more with minority institutions. Our strong collaboration with allies and partners will enable accelerated capability delivery and interoperability in the contested battle space. Together, we will be far stronger. Thank you for the opportunity to testify and for your ongoing support.
Thank you, Ms. Hsu. And I should have reminded the witnesses of our commandments on CITI. Step one, we started on time, so we fulfilled that one. We'll enforce the 5-minute rule, and to the extent possible, most importantly and most difficultly, let's try and avoid the use of acronyms and jargon and use simple and direct language that average Americans can understand. Dr. LaPlante, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Gallagher, Ranking Member Khanna, and Representative Slotkin, distinguished members of the committee, thanks for the opportunity to be here today on this important topic. And as I think of the chart that was shown in the opening, what's been going through my mind is I instantly want to diagnose it and think about what's going on in Ukraine. So it'll be very interesting as we have this hearing. As actually the conflict in Ukraine has illustrated, in many ways, we've underemphasized production. If you noticed in that example, the production, there was actually a delay between when the prototype was completed and the production started, and it looks like they had to go through a different contracting process. So that was just not the least of which. We do have the adaptive acquisition framework, which has all the different pathways of acquisition. We have the software pathway now. We have the OTAs, other transactional authority. Think of it as a way to get somebody under contract within a couple of days. We have another type of authority that allows us to actually not have to get the requirements nailed down initially. Like in that chart, remember the requirements took very long to go right into a prototype and then ideally go right into production. For those of you inside Washington, it's called mid-tier acquisition. So there's a lot of flexibility we have, but that's not enough. We need to, actually the example shows this, do a better job in my view of integrating the 3 legs of this stool. And I'm going to way oversimplify it, but if you've ever had a house built, you probably understand what they are. One is you have to understand the requirements and get them approved. In your family, it might be you and your spouse. What is the house that we want to have? We saw in that example how long it took from the initial idea for the requirements, for what to build actually was approved. The second part is you have to have the money, and the money has to be in the right place in the right year. And the third, you have to have the right acquisition. Think of it as you have to have your contractor selected, ready to go. If any of those three legs of that stool, just like if you're building a house, is out of sync, or you change your mind, or the money changes, or the contract is bad, it can mess it up. Now, it's hard to believe it, but all three legs of that stool in the Department of Defense do not come together until at least the Deputy Secretary of Defense, if not the Secretary of Defense. Now, we have exceptions of that where those delegations have gone lower, and it's been very agile. And in fact, the software acquisition pathway that you all given us is really using that same requirement in agile sense to develop software continuously. So what we really need to think about as we think about PBBE, like that chart, and we also think about how we can rapidly get to production, is how we put this all together. And that's what we're happy here to talk about. We have also historically, this is again for the basics, separated how we get weapon systems or capabilities into three phases. We design the system, we then go into production of the system, and then we sustain it, sometimes for 40, 50 years. 70% of the money is in sustainment, 70%. All three of those phases have different personalities, have different contracts, have different rules. And all you have to have is one of those phases not work. So I'll tell you that because we tell you how we need to change and how we are changing. The other piece of it is all that matters is getting the capability into the warfighter hands. We know that. We know that it doesn't matter how beautiful the prototype is, as the example said, it has to get to the warfighter. And frankly, we've all in this country have downplayed production. We've downplayed production. And peace dividends after the Cold War and a focus on counterinsurgency operations, necessarily so, after 9/11, led us to prioritize other things than the industrial base and not prioritize production. If you do not do production, no matter how brilliant your innovation is, it's not going to get to a warfighter. While these were conscious decisions jointly made by DoD and Congress based on the security environment, with your help, we can get back on these conscious decisions and reverse the trend. First, we need consistent long-term funding for these lead time systems. In munitions, we're finally getting multi-year funding. And if people want to understand why does that matter, think of it in terms of liquidity. If you have a fund, or your bank account, or you're managing your retirement, and you need to have a plan for having to be able to access it very quickly, that's liquidity. The Department of Defense, because it's had to deal with all these ups and downs of the budget and the sequester and the CR, has had to keep that liquidity too. And the budgeteers keep that liquidity by buying munitions in 1 year at a time. And then when a budget jolt happens, which happens almost every year, they take it out of the liquid accounts, which is usually training and munitions and things like that. So there's a reason it's there. We have to change that attitude for some of these systems. We have to continue to have more flexible authorities. And then we must be able to provide and buy things in advance, procure things in advance. And we must also get the budget passed on time. And I know it's unfair because all of you support the budget, but I think the number is 4 years. We have not had a budget out of the last 10, 11 years. And it's not funny to think that if the Chinese had done the same thing, we'd be in a better place. So we also need to get the budget worked out. So again, this is all about getting the technology into production and taking that timeline, that horrible timeline, and collapsing it. And I'll give you examples of how we're doing it in Ukraine. The system can do it. So I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Look forward to digging in the question and answer portion. Ms. Hsu, okay, so we're trying to figure out this problem of from concept to fielding a weapon or a particular system in various case studies. How do we reduce that timeline, particularly in light of the prospect of a PLA invasion of Taiwan in the next 2 to 3 years? So if we were to analyze your budget last year, how much of it is being spent to deliver capabilities in the next 2 to 5 years versus capabilities in the next 10 to 30 years? What are we doing in the short term?
We're doing actually a lot in the short term. One of the key things that we're doing is the Rapid Defense Experimentation Reserve exercises we're conducting starting this year. A year and a half ago, we initiated this to identify the joint warfighting challenge needs for a future highly contested fight. What we've done is taken the joint staff's information on what's needed to conduct the fight. We went to all the services to ask them for prototypes they're developing that could address these needs. This year, we will be taking these prototypes and rapidly demonstrating capabilities. And my counterpart right here has already worked out a process to say, if we demonstrate the utility in the joint staff, the co-coms and services say, I need this rapidly, I turn right over to Bill LaPlante and ANS to accelerate that capability through.
So if we just, and riffing off that and what Dr. LaPlante said at the end of his testimony, when just like at the core of it, why does it take on average between 9 to 26 years to deliver new capability to warfighters? What's at the heart of that issue?
Well, I think let's use the example that you showed, but there's other examples with different things.
Yeah.
So, but the nice or the bad thing about your example, the reason it's an interesting one is it has the 2-year prototype that DIU did. DIU did its job.
Yeah.
So it's saying, okay, even when you do the prototype in 2 years or less, look at what still happens. So what happened there, I mean, I don't know the case, but what happened there is the department and probably our stakeholders could not make a decision on whether they wanted to do it or not. That's what that means, where it takes that long to get the requirement.
And who in the department is that? Is that some amorphous person in the sort of acquisition workforce, or?
No, it's not in the acquisitions
Yeah.
side at all. And this is not a criticism. The decision to go forward with a material solution is first comes up when there's a requirement issued. I need it. And you saw that on that chart, that it took how long for them to get from the idea to a requirement. So now these authorities that you've been given, that can happen much, much faster. You can get a requirement done in months. For Ukraine, we're getting requirements done within weeks. Ukrainians say they need it. EUCOM says that's good. We get ordered. We got it. But if you take 10 years to get a requirement, you're going to have, and you have a 2-year prototype, you have at least 12-year program. So that's part of that. And this gets to the PPBE reform I think we've talked about. And then there's another piece of this, which I mentioned earlier. From the case you showed, what should have happened is the prototype should have been set up with a contract that, if successful, it would go, as CITI said, immediately into production. That you don't just do the prototype and then stop and then look at it and then do another contract. You set it up that when you issue the contract for the prototype, you already have the hook in to go right in production if you're ready to go. We don't do that nearly enough. Part of it is because it's different color of money. Part of it is how the acquisition system has been trained.
Our sense is we've given all these authorities, OTAs, and other fancy authorities in recent years in a bipartisan fashion. What we get is that they're not really being used aggressively by the department. A, can you push back on that if you disagree? And then B, what would be is there a way to quantify how often these authorities are being used? Could we set up a process where we come to you on a regular basis and say, okay, how many OTAs have you used this year or this quarter, or something like that, just so we have a sense of whether the authority we've given you is actually helping you solve this problem?
Well, I'll start with giving you some data, Representative Gallagher, Chairman. We did, as soon as I got in the job, I asked that question. I go, okay, so let me tell you what the different things. Again, I'll simplify the language, not use acronyms. This rapid going right to prototyping called mid-tier acquisition, which the authority came in 2018. There are currently 133 active programs, and over the next 5 years, it's almost $60 billion. So it's substantive. Do I think we need to do more? Yes, but the Space Development Agency, that's all they're doing. On OTAs, the number for FY20, you might recall, was about 20 billion of OTAs. Actually, the Army's doing the most OTAs. So those are being used.
Huh.
Software acquisition pathway, it's smaller because it's newer, about 10 billion over the years. Now, if you look at the acquisition budget, which is research and procurement typically added together, it's still not the majority of it. but they are being used.
I'm over time, and I'll give the other members 40 extra seconds because I violated the second commandment. But Ms. Slotkin is recognized for 5 minutes.
Sure. You know, again, for members up here, we all know what DIU is, and we like the idea of DIU. Can you give us a status update on DIU, the plan to nominate someone? I guess it's not a Senate confirmed position, but to put someone in the seat. Just where are we, very, very briefly, on DIU?
The news will come out very shortly.
Okay.
I don't want to get ahead of SecDef. but
Sure. No, I don't need you to break news, but I guess you know, it's gone without a director for a while, and you know, are you putting more resources into this organization? Is it an organization that we're peeling and paring back? Just where could you just give me your approach on that organization?
They in FY 24 budget, they got a substantial increase. And I'm super excited with a new person coming in.
Okay.
He will be phenomenal.
Okay.
You will be super excited. too.
Great. Okay. We just want to make sure that, because that becomes a focal part. We deal with a lot of folks in the private sector, and that's their entry point for many of them into the department. So I think it's important. You know, Dr. LaPlante, you were talking about, and I've seen it up close in the Pentagon, the requirements process, all the legs of the stool taking a long time. Is it not possible to put what we used to call the Pentagon exploding deadlines on these things, that like, if you can't come up with the requirements in 6 months, you no longer are on the pathway, like just something that moves the process that comes from leadership top down?
Yes, it is, and I'll tell you how we're doing it. So I was the Air Force acquisition executive back in 2013 to 2016 when we set up the B-21 bomber. That was done by the Rapid Capability Office. It was remarkable to be the the acquisition executive, to watch how those three legs of the stool worked with the RCO. A person would show up from the RCO with a package at my door, come in, it was a classified package, and say, this is what we want to do in acquisition, this is the contract, whatever. I'd ask a few questions. Great. Probably that same day or the next day, they're in the chief of staff's office saying, what do you have the requirement down? Yes, no. Get the requirement done, then talk to the Secretary of the Air Force for the money, check it with AT&L. They would do all that process in 4 days. 4 days. Now, then you say, well, can we scale that? How many things can you go to the most senior people 4 days? So what we're doing is we're trying this model with across the department where we're pushing it down at the deputies level. We're doing about 15 of these sprints where we bring everybody together, all the stakeholders around the table. It's called CAPS. And we're going around those three legs and moving the money and watching the requirements. And so the idea is, let's get it down, let's get it to the next level. Then if we can push it down further, that's the hope. You're going to hear talk about portfolio management. That's the idea behind portfolio management.
Yeah. I don't know if Ms. Hsu, you wanted to add anything. I will just say, and I'll let a ranking member come and take his proper seat here, but I would say it would be to the advantage of you all to make positive success stories visible to the committee. Because even I've been here 4 years, and we feel like we have the same conversation. Different administrations, same conversations. We're trying to improve it. We're trying to make it better. Statistics help, right? Change in how the process goes. But if I knew that there was guidance from the top down on exploding deadlines that would help corral, so that the DepSecDef is not the first person to bring all those strands together finally at the end of the process, I think that would go a long way. And we're always happy. I know I was at the department, we are trained to avoid Congress at all costs, but when you have positive stories, to bring those up here, because we're stuck in a rut on this narrative, and we want to get out of the rut. And I will yield back to the ranking. Sorry.
Thank you for doing that, Representative Slotkin.
Dr. McCormick is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Hsu, we have Honorable Ms. Hsu, we have an interesting predicament when we come for preparing for places like Taiwan. Most people say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, especially in a theater where this war, if they have a war there, it could be over within a week, especially if they're not properly prepared. In my opinion, we don't have much prepositioned there. we have not done a good job of supplying them with the arms. We have not allocated through our appropriations process. My question, and I know right now it sounds like an acquisitions issue, but really I'm going to talk about technology sharing. When meeting with the Taiwanese, they've begged for technologies to help them with smart mines, for example. At least what we're able to, I understand we're not going to give them our leading edge technologies, but at least something to help them prepare, something to help them build, or the ability to purchase something, which goes back to Mr. LaPlante, of course. So either sharing technologies or by acquisition, how are we helping our partners to prepare for something that is very real and may happen very quickly and not end well if we're not ready?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, there is a CITI, which is focused on Taiwan, that meets on a monthly basis across the most senior level across the DoD. Okay, so discussions that's ongoing on what we can provide to Taiwan is addressed in that meeting. Okay, the other thing is I also happened to meet with the Taiwanese when I was in Hawaii 2 weeks ago. And one of the things I advise them is they need to think more asymmetrically. So I'll be happy to expand a lot more details on the way they think, and they should think in the classified session following this.
Okay, so in summary, we have a plan to help them one way or another.
We're trying to get them to also think a little differently.
Okay. As a former Marine, I like the asymmetric thing. Mr. LaPlante, Honorable Mr. LaPlante, you talk about the 70% of the dollars for sustainment. I understand we have a problem with a sustainable model of arms and munitions production. Are we doing something? I feel like we're doing something wrong. Is there a good plan to make this cheaper by sustaining rather than constantly doing this wave? And I'm brand new to Congress, but it seems a very inefficient system where we keep on ebbing and flowing and creating a huge process of training gluts and everything else.
Thank you for the question. I would say this, for a tank, what you said is exactly right. When you build a tank, you have to sustain it, and there's a lot of money that goes into sustaining it. When you have munitions, unfortunately, we haven't yet figured out how to build munitions that we could just keep and sustain. We fire them and they're gone. So that's actually the production is that what we're talking about. What we're really talking about is production, not the sustainment part. It is just a reminder, though, on items like tanks and other things that the sustainment is in the money. In the case of what we're doing right now, in this budget that we just released, there's $30.6 billion in munitions production. Okay, it's a nearly 12% increase over 23 enacted, 50% higher from 5 years ago. We're also putting billions of dollars into the industrial base. So again, this isn't sustainment. This is actually get the production lines faster and higher. So that's what we're really focused on in this budget.
And I'm assuming that that's related to our recent expenditures.
Well, it's related to, it's related to everything that's going on in Ukraine,
Right.
but it also related to the Pacific situation.
Okay, good. Real quickly, another question for you, Ms. Hsu. Funding for R&D, one of the big dilemmas we always have is what's more efficient, funding R&D through the government, which you kind of have a sustained model of if I succeed and it becomes very good, then we move on to the next piece, whereas I don't have to really compete because it's not competitive once I award the R&D money, as opposed to letting the civilians come up and compete with each other for something with their own R&D and risk, of course, which seems much more at least competitive. I'm worried about which model we're pursuing more and which one long-term is going to benefit us in our procurement of new technologies that are efficiently obtained.
I would say that we look for the best ideas, regardless where it's coming from. My job is making sure the ideas that's coming from, independent of which organization or person comes up with the idea, we fund that. So we are looking at not just the defense industry, we're also looking at the commercial industry. And when we have dialogue with them, both the defense as well as the commercial industry, they're incredibly excited.
I would also say this, it's been really the dilemma here for years, is how do we attract private capital to do the R&D? How do we incentivize them while also using the government private R&D, if you will, in the right place too? And I would say there's two, it's an extreme example, two different models that are different. The traditional model, let's say for a large weapon system, is that and this happens to be with the production, when you ask these companies, well, why aren't you using your own money to build production lines in anticipation before the government gives you the contract, that they call the demand signal? They say, essentially, to go to my board and get CapEx approval for billions of dollars for the next 5 years, I have to convince them, essentially, that this is really going to happen. And we have a history of going up and down in some of these things.
Well,
when you look at a private capital, they have to look and see what markets it's going to support. Well, guess what? The market for private capital is production. So they got to look and see the production lines. So I keep saying it comes back to production.
Okay, time has expired. Mr. Khan is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Schutt, it was good seeing you yesterday, as well as the director of DARPA. As we discussed, I believe that DARPA over the last 50 years has been the largest force for innovation in the world, unparalleled in what it has achieved. It's a shame that we can't simply scale it and do more with it. But when you look at all of the fundamental technologies on which Silicon Valley is based, things like the internet, GPS, the mouse, the unmanned vehicles, a lot of that all came out of DARPA. And then my understanding from you was then you have other parts of the food chain. After the fundamental research, you have DIU, which is working with traditionally non-defense industries and innovation. And then you have this Office of Strategic Capital that has been set up at DOD to try to fund emerging technologies that will have practical application for defense. Is that funded yet for what you need to invest in the companies? Is it not? How can we help to make sure it has the funding and flexibility that you need?
I think for this current year, it's a little over $100 million to get the Office of Strategic Capital stood up and start to run. We will be coming back and hopefully working with Congress to make sure that the additional authority we will need to provide capital for companies will be there. So we'll be following up with you.
In subsequent years or in this year?
The little over $100 million is current year.
What about for the funding you'll need for the companies?
No, this is really standing up the office, okay? The funding for the company, we're going to need some additional authorities, okay, to be able to provide, I would say, prevent adversary capital funding into our critical companies that deliver critical components. Let me step back a second, just make sure I explain this thoroughly. I've had a number of companies that come to me and say they need help to ramp up their prototype into production. They need the capital to buy the equipment so they can ramp up. And this capital, if we could provide them a guaranteed loan, that will help them to ramp up. So it became very obvious that we needed an Office of Strategic Capital to give them some guaranteed loans. So this is what we're trying to pursue. The Department of Energy does this. Like I mentioned, they provided over $400 million to Tesla to get them started in ramping up production, right? And Tesla paid it back in 3 years. So this is the type of authority we're looking for to make sure we, DOD, could do the same thing, to help the critical small companies that build critical components for us, and to make sure that adversaries aren't investing.
Could we do that authority in this year's NDAA? I mean, when you have the guy who votes against every higher defense budget saying we need to put more money in this defense, I think you could get a fair amount of support for this type of an effort.
We will definitely work with you.
Are there any other ideas that you have? I've respected how Chairman Gallagher's been open to really trying to do something to have the better adoption of technology. Are there any other concrete suggestions you have for our committee of what we could do legislatively in the next 2 years on this issue?
I'd like to come back with a list and engage with you guys.
Yeah, we will come back with a list. I think the problem statement, let's focus on which we can all agree on. The problem statement is how do we get ready for production or get the production started even before government has fully funded it or the program of record has fully funded it. Can we get another fund, either a capital fund that they pay it back or a fund where we have almost a stockpile so that you can go right into production? We were just in a case today that Heidi referred a company to me today, a remarkable company, doing everything we're saying. They had a VC in the room. Heidi, you know what company this is. And they've developed a prototype. They've got VC money. They've got a business case for a commercial market they see emerging. Okay, all they needed from the DoD, but they've gotten some R&D from us, is some commitment that will be part of their production. In fact, they showed plans of producing, this is something that flies, hundreds of these things in 3 years. They even costed them out. And so this is a golden opportunity where we say, yes, we will pay for part of that.
Mr. Strong is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hsu, thank you for taking time to meet with me this month, and I'm glad Mr. Garimaldi was able to join us. I also want to thank you for agreeing to speak to the Huntsville-Madison County Chamber of Commerce for breakfast next week. All of my questions are for you and Dr. LaPlante. First thing I want to discuss is the Valley of Death. I'll advocate for research and development all day long. It's the heartbeat of Huntsville, Alabama. One Decatur, Alabama native, a NASA astronaut, said it best. Ideas are potential energy. They're really wonderful, but nothing will happen until the risk putting them into action. That was a statement that I've always remembered. I'm concerned the Department of Defense isn't quite meeting the mark when it comes to transitioning projects into programs of record and warfighting capabilities. One, how does your office define technology transition? Mr. Plant?
So I'll be happy.
Okay,
Yeah, I'll just define it.
Thank you.
Technology transition is it gets to the warfighter.
So I'll give you a definition of multiple ways we can literally transition the technology. Certainly, the one that most people think about is the normal transition into a program in which you will have procurement quantities. That's a normal path. The other transition could very well be it goes completely commercial. We just buy the commercial product, right? It could very well be it's a piece of software that transitions into an existing system that's delivered, already being used by warfighters. That's another transition path. Or,
And that answers my question. What metrics do you use to measure the success of technology transitions?
so that is a great question. I am in the process of pulling data exactly on that. The first thing we needed to do was define the different ways we could do transition, then see how we can dig into the details data-wise to pull that data together. So we're in the process of trying to do that right now.
Over the last 5 years, how many research and development programs have failed to transition, would you estimate?
There's no way I can tell you that
Okay.
because I don't have that data.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields. I will recognize myself. We'll start a second round here, since we don't have a full house, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Dr. LaPlante, I'd like to dig into something you mentioned in your testimony about the importance of multi-year procurement. We have multi-year authority for key munition systems. I'm in emphatic and violent agreement with that statement. And if any of our friends on the Appropriations Committee are listening, as I'm sure they are, I hope they will be persuaded of the wisdom of that case. Maybe could you talk about that in the context of one particular system, the long-range anti-ship missile system? I recently visited a Lockheed facility to examine LRASM production. I think we have an opportunity to dramatically increase production with that certainty that a multi-year pot of money would provide. So talk about that problem set with respect to that particular weapon system.
Yeah, this is why multi-years are so critical, but why also some parts of the community find them hard to do because it takes away their budget liquidity. But let's take the LRASM example. If we, the department with the Congress, were to put together a more than multi-year contract to build a number of LRASMs, and we settle the contract, we'll get several things. Number one, it will be cheaper. You will get a cheaper price per LRASM by doing it that way. Somewhere between 5 and 10% is most likely, because you're buying them in quantity. But that's not the only reason to do it. The second thing you got is you got the prime, in this case Lockheed. We say to Lockheed, you better get your supply chain stabilized and flow this money down for the next 3 years, because they're not going to scatter to the wind, and we want to see that. And you get during budget season. It's when people during budget season, people are in jobs like mine, and they rightfully so say, can we buy less of these number of airplanes because we need to find money? And you say, well, you can, but you will break the multi-year and it'll cost this much money. It provides discipline in the system. So that's what we're trying to do. It helps the supply chain. It is cheaper. You can't do it on everything. You shouldn't do it on everything. But that's what we're talking about.
How many do you think we could get to a year, based on your analysis of that, specifically LRASM, based on your analysis?
Oh, gee, I don't have the number. I'll give a bad number, but let's see. Well, LRASM's a bad. Let me see how many. We could certainly get to tens a year. I would like to think we would get on LRASMs up to hundreds per year, way hundreds per year. It's not a precision weapon, but we're getting 155 rounds.
Yeah.
We're getting it up to 10 times the production rate that we currently have. We are asking industry those kind of questions. What would it take to do 5 times the production rate for LRASM?
And in your opinion, the most critical variable is that multi-year procurement?
Yeah. Well, first of all,
signal,
it's getting the multi-year, but then the system has to kick in and say, we are really going to do it. We're going to fund it.
Yes.
And you know the process. We put it together with the budgeteers. It comes over to appropriations. We have to show all the stuff is done, and then we do it. They do it pretty well for block buys for the submarines, like the Virginia class. I think they bought 10 submarines for the price of 9 with a block buy.
Could you quickly talk about the large lot procurement pilot program, which I think includes LRASM, JASM, AMRAAM, SM6, and just status? When do you envision it becoming permanent? Are there plans to expand the program?
Yeah. So we got the multi-year authority when the authorizer just passed at the end of the year. What you described is it's actually a clever way of saying we don't want to do all these at the same time because they involve some of the same suppliers. What is a phased way that we can phase in the multi-years, knowing that we have these cross dependencies? That's smart, and looking at them as a system, even though they're not. So it's an idea of having a very smart way of which year you build more of which weapon, knowing where the suppliers are. And that's all being put together now. It's actually a very clever idea. Because again, if we look independently at a stovepipe of one weapon system and we think we're surging that with a multi-year, well, the solid rocket motors may be the same ones on Standard Missile. So how do we make sure we do it intelligently? That's what that's about.
And then quickly, do R&D proposals need to include potential production plans and options?
No, they don't, and I think you're getting at something that's really important. I think, and I'm going to let Heidi speak, but I do think that we need to, at the DIUs and everything, all the great, we should be asking for proposals. That's not just the R&D, but the proposal should come with a production proposal. Heidi?
Yeah. In the R&D side, first of all, we're focused on producing a prototype that works. So once you demonstrate capability on the prototype, the next step is asking for production. So that's a process we go through.
Mr. Khan is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I just want to pick up where I'd left off about this process of adoption. You know, let me just start out by saying, which I wish more people in Silicon Valley recognized, which is that the Department of Defense has been the most innovative institution in the last 50 years in the history of the world. Sometimes I think the Department of Defense as a whole gets a bad rap that they're not innovative or not doing the technology. The fundamental technology innovation in this country has largely come out of the efforts of DARPA on issue after issue. And I'm very proud of my district, but they take the fundamental technology and commercialize it. But we should be very clear-eyed about the success of the United States government in cooperation with our universities and industry in the fundamental innovation of the later 20th century and early 21st century. Secretary LaPont and Secretary Hsu, would you agree with that characterization?
Yeah, go ahead, Heidi.
Absolutely. I think DARPA by far is the most admired organization worldwide. To all the countries that I talk to, they want to copy our model of DARPA. PRC just want to steal it.
Yeah, and there's another concept which it's something interesting to think about. I remember back in the day, I think it was Office of Naval Research, I was working with them, and one of their philosophies was to fund science and research that were important for the Navy that were not going to be funded commercially. Only the Navy had the application. They actually were looking at things that there wasn't a commercial application because they felt that the market wouldn't deliver them. So that's one thing to think about. I don't know if that's still true where technology is, but the second piece, of course, is how do we explain the market to these outside investors? That's where I think our biggest disconnect is it's really hard for a Silicon Valley or VC to really understand what is the market that if they're successful, that they're going to get. And of course, the market in our world is production and sustainment. And that is very hard for them to see, and we don't do a good job of explaining what that market is. Instead, we end up focusing on, isn't this a really cool item and shouldn't the DoD have it? That's really important, but we have to be very better to explain, if you make this work, this will proliferate on every ship and airplane, or it'll go in space on all the proliferated LEOs. And we don't do that job well enough.
Well, I say all of this about the innovation tradition of the DoD because I truly believe it and want people in Silicon Valley to have the appropriate sense of humility. But I also think it should be impetus for the DoD to say, look, we have been the engine of the greatest innovation. We should continue to figure out this adoption challenge so we remain the most innovative institution. Because now, if some of this work is happening in the private sector, it's sort of not asking the DoD to do something that they haven't done before. They have been the most innovative institution. We would need to figure out with the modern advances in AI, software, other things, how they remain the most innovative institution in the world. And so it seems, I guess my point is just it's consistent with the very ethos of the Department of Defense.
I would agree, and I think, but we also have to allow, and I know you would agree with this too, the disruptors in, because the disruptors can really keep everybody from being complacent. And that's why it's really, really important to look at these new folks that have a different way of doing business and get them in, because they can disrupt and they can get the incumbents to get their act together.
Humility in Silicon Valley. I like that idea. Mr. Strong.
Great question, and I concur with you. I know at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, we're fortunate with all the research they do there, but 72% of the graduates stay there in that area, and I think that's because of the ingenuity and what all of us in this room are working toward. The Air Force AFWERX Agility Prime Program's goal is to ensure a robust domestic market for electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, and to develop these capabilities for the Department of Defense. eVTOL technology can be used for a variety of tasks, including cargo delivery in contested environments and personnel movement. How is your offices and the military services planning to scale procurement for eVTOL aircraft for the Agility Prime program?
Heidi and I are smiling because that was the example that actually we were just looking at, was one of those type of the technologies. And so it's very, very exciting. And again, I think there is a dual commercial opportunity, and I think we got to get them, show them production possibilities in the DoD. But we're looking, it's exactly the companies that Heidi and I are looking at.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Army Space and Missile Defense Command's Tech Center has started a collaborative research and development program with 2 universities in support of high-energy laser and optical technology, the University of Alabama in Huntsville and Clemson University. Are both of you familiar with these programs?
I am familiar with the high-energy laser that we're working on.
Thank you. Can you speak to the benefits of this partnership to UAH and Clemson with SMDC?
I can tell you one thing. Director energy was my #1 priority. So the research that can be conducted that can enhance our capabilities much more quickly, I'm 100% behind it.
And I would just say what's in the news even today about some of the horrible they call it UAS or drone strikes. Some of the best counter drone technologies involve laser and the concepts. That is really where we can scale this thing and with magazine depth.
Thank you. I want to invite both of you to the Rocket City and to the University of Alabama in Huntsville. I'm sure that Mr. Duncan will be happy to host you at Clemson as well. Thank you again for answering my questions.
I hope the chairman and the ranking member get an invite to. So just a quick logistical note. We have a classified session after this, but the SCIF is not open until 5. It's not my intention to filibuster for 35 minutes. I'm not a senator. However, I'm going to ask a few more questions until Raj gets fully upset, and we'll have a break before that. So I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Hsu, in the FY21 NDAA, we established something called the Israeli Operations Technology Working Group. This was in section 1299 of the NDAA. This required a report that was due by law on March 15th. We've been checking. We haven't been able to get the report. It's possible it was delivered. Do you know what the status of that report is? When can we expect it?
I will definitely check on that. We're doing great work with our Israeli partners.
Okay. Well, I just would like to reiterate that having blown past, if I'm right that we haven't gotten the report, we're past the deadline. This is an annual requirement, and we just expect that the committee will get the report in a timely manner. I would hope that you would commit to figuring out where the report is and getting it submitted.
Okay, I do know that we weren't behind because legislative affairs tracks all the reports. And
admittedly, there are too many reports, so I'll concede that point. So I'm for a BRAC for report process.
If I could, and maybe the committee's already done this, that may be something, report or not, I mean, digging into the recent stuff we were doing with the Israelis, what Heidi's doing, what we're doing, it's remarkable. I don't know what, Heidi's a celebrity over there. I was there 2 weeks ago, and we are sharing technology. It is unbelievable what we're doing. We'd love to talk to you in a classified session about it.
Yeah, I think it could be a good story. And then quickly, Dr. LaPlante, 2 questions for you. Title 10, Section 3453 established a congressional mandate for a preference for commercial products and services to meet the department's needs more quickly. You've talked about, former DIU Director Mike Brown talked about a fast follower strategy for commercial acquisition. It seems, from our perspective, it's fallen by the wayside. I would love to get your perspective. How are you enforcing that? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, you always have to, if you don't focus on it, maybe we need to focus on it more. The system may drift away from it. And here's what, it's human nature, unfortunately, and you have to counteract it. That's why it's good it's in the NDA. One thing humans like to do, particularly in the government, is they like to tweak. They like to take the commercial item and they like to say, yeah, I really want that plane, but once they're going to buy it, I need to have these comms. I have to this and this. And what was a commercial item, maybe still technically is a commercial item, is anything but commercial. So it's a tendency, a human tendency that we have to stop. The second thing, which we've done a lot of work done on, we get wrapped around the axle on the pricing, on whether or not it's a commercial item and can you prove that the price is a fair market price. Sounds very bureaucratic and boring, but we have IG report after IG report about this, and it can cause people to be afraid a little bit of going commercial because they're afraid that they're going to be in some argument with somebody about what's the cost of the part. Those are not reasons not to do it. It's just the impedance that naturally happens. So you need constant pressure on the top.
Final question for you, Dr. LaPlante. I think you and I share a passion for energetics and think we have an opportunity to make a quantum leap on energetics. Can you talk about that opportunity and what you think needs to be done?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit, but I know Heidi's also got a huge group on that too.
Either of you.
Yeah, so we've got, I can go through it here. We've got a whole bunch of DPA funding going into energetics, given, of course, the munitions problem we have. Even this 155 plant, that we're going to need totally new energetics. It's a problem in Europe as well. actually also a lot of the sources of the energetics are not from countries that we want them to be from, or the raw materials. So you have a whole effort that way. I know Heidi's got a persistent effort on energetics too.
Yeah. For example, we're working on additive manufacturing of explosives, okay? And we're developing modeling and simulation tools to help us develop new formulations of energetics, okay? And we're doing biomanufacturing of cellulose to provide higher purity precursors, okay? So it could become a more reliable source of nitrocellulose-based propellants. Okay, so we're doing multiple things in the S&T arena. And the other thing is we demonstrated 675% increase in the blast performance using enhanced explosive fill and reactive material warhead on an advanced precision kill weapon system. So these are all the stuff we're doing. This is just a little bit of an example of all the stuff we're doing.
The stuff you can do with additive manufacturing now is just remarkable, what Heidi was referring to. I don't know if you saw in the news just the other day, there was a solid rocket motor fueled launch in space. It didn't get to orbit, but it got successfully launched. The solid rocket motor is completely 3D printed. And it was the size, how big was that? I mean, it was not it was as big as almost it looked like the Saturn V first stage. And we went to those companies out there, you've been there too, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's real. And people who say, well, 3D printing, well, that's fine, but is it really going to work in war? Tell that to Ukrainians.
Yeah.
They're doing it every day.
Mr. O'Connor is recognized.
I do have to briefly needle you, Mr. Chairman, for the references. Raj, he'll be the ranking member next hearing, but don't feel bad.
I have a hearing tonight, too. My brain has been.
It reminds me, and we all came in, Raj, myself, and Chairman Gallagher all came into Congress at the same time. I consider him a good friend, but it reminds me of my exchange on Twitter a few days ago where someone said that his Republican father asked him whether Ro Khanna was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, at which point I said that I have higher name recognition in the United States than Rishi Sunak. So on that note, I did want to ask about this cut of 20% decrease in the science and technology funding from the budget, as I understand it, and try to understand why that's being reduced. Secretary Hsu.
I think we measured our S&T funding from PB to PB. So PB to PB, it actually went up.
So, okay, so it hasn't been reduced to 20%, I guess?
Not from PB to the PB request.
Okay. And the only other question I had was about lab infrastructure. I know we spoke about this briefly, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to share some of your comments about the importance of funding that.
Yeah, we absolutely do need to fund more in the infrastructure side. We have crumbling buildings, especially in Naval Research Lab. What we're trying to do is add additional fundings into our lab and test infrastructure. Literally, it was important enough, we raised it into the Defense Management Action Group meeting that went all the way up to the SecDef level. The other thing that we ended up doing this year, we actually created a separate fund of $25 million focused on laboratory infrastructure. So it's a centrally lab investment program. And this year you will see we have $92 million in our FY24 request, again, to help in the lab and test infrastructure.
If I may comment, the importance of lab infrastructure, I can't be described on the workforce and attracting the best people. Before I was here, I was the CEO of a nonprofit high-tech lab up in Cambridge. And I'll tell you, we had to have the cutting-edge equipment and the latest and all types of modern engineering tools, or we wouldn't get the best PhD folks are getting their PhD. They want to see something that's even better that they worked on in their PhD. If they go in and they say, come work for us, and it's a crumbling building, and the equipment is old, guess what? It's harder to keep them. So it's so important that we modernize this.
Thank you.
My apologies, Rokana. I've done 4 interviews with Raj Krishnamurthy today, and my 2 ranking members, Ro and Raj, dominate my life in a good way. So, Mr. Strong, do you have any more questions?
I'm good.
Okay, I'm going to do one more. Sorry. Follow up on the energetics discussion. So my understanding, having spent some time with the various reports that have come out in recent years, phenomenal work, by the way, that's been done on this, and I commend those reports to everybody. We're not even talking about a new technology. We're talking about technology we invented, CL20, China Lake 20, in the 70s or 80s, but we're still largely dependent on technology and HMX suite of energetics that we developed in the 40s. Tragically and ironically, the CCP stole the basic components of CL20, and they are using that, and it has more penetrating power, it has greater range. So my understanding is we could take existing technology and put it on existing systems and dramatically increase our range and lethality.
Yeah, but and I'm not sure the specific energetic, but the infamous 155 rounds, which everybody talks about, which is the bane of all we're doing, which is ramping up to this 5 times. Next year, they're introducing a totally new energetics there and getting away from the older energetics. So now with these production lines going hotter, we have an opportunity to inject these energetics right into the production lines.
Yeah, I just would hope, I know we have all these working groups, and I don't want to create more bureaucracy, but I think it'd be helpful if there was like one person at a sufficiently high level in DoD waking up every day thinking about how do we really move forward when it comes to energetics and make this energetics quantum leap. I think we have a massive, massive opportunity there. I've been persuaded by reading through all these reports, and that could be that's something we could do together for the next 2 years that would have a massive impact.
Yeah, I'm sure Heidi and I would love to take that up for action. Great.
Great. And could you quickly comment on this, on page 5 of your testimony, Dr. LaPlante, you talk about, we traditionally thought about innovation technology, whereas now we need to think about innovation not only in prototyping, but also in development and production as well. Are you referring to so-called Industry 4.0 efforts, or expand on that a little bit?
Not necessarily. What I'm referring to is what we saw at that company that did the solid rocket motor that by additive manufacturing, or what Heidi and I saw in this vertical takeoff company, is what we saw was that in the prototyping phase itself, they were already designing the production. And then they were going back and they had it all digital. And they were going back and forth, and they would change a production way and to do something faster in production, get their models going. They'd say, oh, we can go back to the design and do this. They were doing it together. And it's brilliant. It's what the commercial space is doing the same thing. That's what we're talking about.
Dr. Roper, I think, recently released a report that talks about that in partnership with McKinsey. We're trying to look into that. We think it's very promising.
Yeah, Dr. Roper, and I have to go follow up. It talks about Formula One doing something.
Yeah,
like
McLaren.
This.
He had a road to Damascus moment in the UK.
Yeah, so it seems to be where everything is going. And again, we hear a lot about digital thread, digital engineering. What we're saying is, no, it's digital design and production together and rapidly going back and forth.
Yeah. I guess my bias is, having been on C-Power for a while and thinking about the inefficiencies that accumulate exponentially from a design that's not stable. If you can leverage that process to really get design stability, it's got to increase speed and reduce costs over the long term. Finally, just to end where we began, I think the consistent theme here is we're concerned about the Valley of Death, and we talk about the Valley of Death, and every SecDef comes in and goes to the Reagan National Defense Forum and talks about the Valley of Death, but the Valley of Death persists. So in sort of 30 seconds or less, like, what is the Valley of Death and how do we kill it? Easy question.
Well, I'm in the process of trying to kill that. At least I'm trying to build a bridge over the Valley of Death, okay? So AppFit money has helped me to accelerate transition by 10 companies, accelerate by 2 years, okay? That's one piece. Office Strategic Capital will help as well. And the third piece, I'm working with ANS. We just talked about different ways we can transform and accelerate things via mid-tier acquisition or Juans or other methods to accelerate acquisition. Over there.
Yeah, so everything that is in design and prototyping should not go into production. Okay, reminder.
Yeah.
There's always going to be somebody to
Not everything should cross the valley of death, is your,
right, right. It should be the valley, of nice try.
some things deserve to die.
Valley of nice try. But what we need to do is we need to make it so that if you're successful on every one of these prototypes, we need to make sure the government says that we say in the government, where's in your plan to go into production right away? What was not done in that example. And we need to have the contracting hooks to do it. And then we have to fund the production. And we will get the things going to production much higher. But we as a country have to be convinced that production matters. Because if you don't do production or you have very low rates, there'll always be many things that won't go to the warfighter.
Any other questions? Well, with that, we'll take a break so you guys can all rest before we go into a classified session. I just want to thank you for this discussion today. I know we didn't have as many members as we do in the full committee hearing, but I tend to think that this stuff, what you guys are working on, is the most important set of issues for the Department of Defense. And I mean, this is how we win going forward. This is how we deter and prevent wars going forward if we get this issue right. And I hope you're sensing that at a time where there's a lot of disagreement on Capitol Hill. I think this is something that we're largely aligned on. We want to fix this problem. We want to work with you to identify the solutions that we can implement in the next 2 to 4 years, not 2 to 4 decades. So thank you for your time here. I look forward to following up in classified session, and the subcommittee hearing is adjourned. Okay. I could have gone 5 more rounds, Raj.